Prince Andrew. It won't stop. If you have not already done so, you should listen to A Very Royal Narcissist Part 5, which is an analysis of Prince Andrew, explaining why his behaviours identify him as being a narcissist. It includes a detailed analysis of his behaviours over a period of time, including the catastrophic and completely ill-considered interview that he undertook with Emily Maitlis last year. That sets the scene and foundation for understanding more about his behaviours. Of course, Prince Andrew has found himself in the news repeatedly as of late, and twice this week. As the BBC reports, the Duke of York's military titles and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen, Buckingham Palace has said. Prince Andrew, 61, will also stop using the style His Royal Highness in an official capacity, a royal source said. It comes as he faces a US civil action over sexual assault allegations, claims he has consistently denied. Two fronts have opened up as against Prince Andrew. The continuing claim brought by Miss Giuffre, and, of course, now the stripping of his various titles. How will all of that impact upon him as a narcissist? I will explain to you. The article explains that a source close to the Duke said he would continue to defend himself against the case brought in New York by Virginia Giuffre. Of course, he will do so because the presentation of that claim is a threat to his control, and his narcissism tells him that he's done nothing wrong. A judge in the city ruled on Wednesday that the case brought by Miss Giuffre could continue after the prince tried to have it dismissed. Buckingham Palace said in a statement, "With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties, and is defending this case as a private citizen." All Prince Andrew's roles have been returned to the Queen with immediate effect, and will be redistributed to other members of the royal family, a source said. A spokesman for the Ministry of Defence said it had no comment about the Duke's military titles being handed back to the Queen, and that it was a matter for the palace. On Thursday, a letter released by anti-monarchy pressure group Republic was signed by more than 150 Royal Navy, Royal Air Force and Army veterans asking the Queen to strip Prince Andrew of his 8 British military titles. That would also, of course, be a threat to control. The response from Buckingham Palace has been swift and almost brutal. The royal family is being firmly distanced from the toxic fallout from the allegations against Prince Andrew. He will have to defend himself against Virginia Giuffre as a private citizen. There will be no more His Royal Highness in this court case. This again demonstrates the canny operation of the Queen, who recognises that she is going to have to cut him adrift in order to preserve the status of the royal family. That as a consequence of the allegations against him, he of course is free to continue to defend himself against that, but thinking ahead, the Queen sees the potential for the sustained claim now being not knocked out as a consequence of the suggestion that it could be, under the terms of the agreement, the settled agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and Victoria Giuffre, or rather Virginia Giuffre, means that the Queen realises that at this point it's simply untenable for him to maintain those titles under increasing pressure, and it starts to stain the royal family further. Moving swiftly and in a canny response, she is ensured to protect the royal family as much as she can, cutting him somewhat adrift. The article explains this is claimed to have been by mutual agreement, stepping back rather than something imposed, but the military titles and royal roles will go to other members of the family, which means they won't be coming back to Prince Andrew, whatever the outcome. The door is being closed on a return to public life. It's not yet clear if this applies to his constitutional role as a Councillor of State, one of 4 royals who can undertake the Queen's official duties should she be unwell. The court case will still make headlines, and there will be concerns. It could cloud a Jubilee year, but this unambiguous decision will have already answered the inevitable calls for his removal from his remaining public roles. Prince Andrew has strongly denied any wrongdoing, and his representatives say that fighting the case is a marathon and not a sprint, although this must feel like a huge and rapid retreat. The Duke had a 22-year career in the Royal Navy and served as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War. The latest palace announcement means he has lost military titles, including Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, one of the most senior infantry regiments in the British Army. The other UK military titles he no longer has include Honorary Air Commodore of RAF Lossiemouth, Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Irish Regiment, Colonel-in-Chief of the Small Arms School Corps, Commodore-in-Chief of the Fleet Air Arm, Royal Colonel of the Royal Highland Fusiliers, Deputy Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Lancers, Queen Elizabeth's own, Royal Colonel of the Royal Regiment of Scotland. The Duke also had several overseas honorary roles, including Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Highland Fusiliers of Canada and Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal New Zealand Army Logistic Regiment. But he will retain his service rank of Vice Admiral, the palace has confirmed. As an ex-member of the armed forces, he was promoted in line with his still-serving peers and made Vice Admiral by the Navy on his 55th birthday in 2015. The Duke was due to be promoted to Admiral on his 60th birthday in 2020, but asked to defer this after stepping back from public duties in 2019. At the time, the palace said his other military appointments had been suspended. The chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, welcomed the return of the Duke of York's military titles and royal patronages. He told the BBC's Newcast podcast that the Duke's change in status ahead of the US civil case was necessary to protect the reputation of the military. Prince Andrew already had stepped back from many of his public duties, I think all of them as well, so I think this was anticipated. Indeed, it was expected from this perspective, so I'm not actually surprised. It's important that the problems that Prince Andrew has incurred aren't bled over into the regiments that he was representing, Mr. Ellwood said. Journalist and former BBC royal correspondent Jenny Bond said she had not anticipated the Prince losing the titles. Clearly, pressure has been asserted on him, and pressure on the Queen was growing for some action because of the disquiet within the military, and people beginning to say, "We don't want to toast his health" at the end of regimental dinners, she said. Miss Giuffre filed a civil case in New York in August 2021 under the state's Child Victims Act, which allows survivors of childhood sexual abuse to pursue a case which otherwise would have been barred because too much time had passed. In court documents filed as part of her civil case against Prince Andrew, Miss Giuffre said she was the victim of sex trafficking and abuse by the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She alleged that part of her abuse involved being loaned out to other powerful men. Miss Giuffre claims the late billionaire financier trafficked her to have sex with Prince Andrew when she was 17. She alleges the Duke abused her on 3 occasions, both in the UK and the United States, when she was a minor under United States law. In an interview with BBC Newsnight in 2019, the Queen's second son said that he had no recollection of ever meeting Miss Giuffre, denial, and her account of them having sex in the US and UK didn't happen, denial, rejection of threat to control. The Duke withdrew from public life shortly after the interview, assertion of control by withdrawal, which he used to repeat his denials of Miss Giuffre's claims and explain his one-time friendship with Epstein and the late financier's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. Last month, Miss Maxwell was found guilty of recruiting and trafficking underage girls to be sexually abused by Epstein. The failure, of course, to reject Miss Giuffre's claim amounts to challenge fuel. It will have bewildered Prince Andrew and infuriated him. The 46-page judgment that was handed down by Judge Kaplan was a very firm rebuttal of the points advanced on behalf of the Prince by his attorneys. Of course, this was not a determination of the claim in its total, but it meant that an opportunity to take the legs from beneath the case by stating that it was barred because of the terms of the settlement agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and Miss Giuffre failed, and therefore the claim must continue. And that failure, documented in a judgment, will amount to challenge fuel. It will be challenge fuel because it contains emotive language, which is directed towards Prince Andrew. Although it's not a huge amount of fuel because it's the written word, it's fuel nevertheless, and the fact that it defeats his application or motion means that it challenges him. His reaction to that, of course, would be to need to nullify that threat to control. He can't do so directly. He's not going to address Judge Kaplan and tell him that he's an arsehole and doesn't know what he's talking about, in the way that some narcissists might do. Instead, behind closed doors, Prince Andrew would bemoan the failure to his lawyers, possibly lashing out at them, accusing them of incompetence and not doing their job properly, such as the haughty reputation by which he goes, and undoubtedly complaining to those that will listen that he's been the victim of a witch hunt. That indirect smearing of the judge and Virginia Giuffre will allow him to have an unconscious sense of control indirectly. Furthermore, hard on the heels of this defeat in court, the stripping of the titles will wound him. The removal of this status will cause significant wounding to Prince Andrew, and similarly will threaten his control. The removal of the titles has no fuel attached to it, and therefore that is why it wounds. And if you'd like to understand more about the three interactions between the narcissist and you as a victim, then you ought to listen to the excellent material, The Three Interactions with the Narcissist, which you'll find in the Knowledge Vault. Link to the Knowledge Vault in the video description. The removal of the titles provides no fuel and wounds him. Again, he will be infuriated. His fury will be ignited by this. However, he will not lash out against his mother because of the other factors where his narcissism recognizes that he needs to keep on good terms with her. Instead, he will now be like a caged beast, strolling around, stampeding about behind closed doors, raging and ranting and complaining. He will doubtless be involved in behind-the-scenes tirades, but he is being kept away and has to be because the Queen cannot and will not countenance further risk to the reputation of the royal family by Prince Andrew going off on some public tirade. He, of course, was advised not to do the interview with Emily Maitlis. He didn't listen. Doubtless he's received legal advice which tells him to take this in a particular direction. He will not listen. He is arrogant, haughty, and believes that he is always right. And he will not be able to comprehend why this claim is being brought and why it has not ended yet. He will lash out, describing other people as incompetent, that they are biased against him. His victim mentality will come to the fore, not as much to the extent as it would with a mid-range narcissist, because he is not one, but nevertheless, like any narcissist, he does have a victim mentality. He will regard Virginia Giuffre's claim as baseless, because his narcissism will tell him that it's baseless. He will believe that he's been stitched up. The paranoia of the narcissist will take him in that direction. He believes that he is being diddled by a money-seeking liar. He will see himself tainted by the association with Maxwell and Epstein, although, of course, he was perfectly content to bask in the benefits of their friendship once upon a time, the residual benefit of connections, money, and possibly other things if the allegations prove to be true. Now, of course, the sun has set on those relationships. Epstein convicted of being a sex offender and dead, and Maxwell awaiting sentence for her own convictions. The association with Prince Andrew also presents a challenge for him, because he's tainted by association with them. The problems continue to stack up for him, and he cannot go on the offensive. He's not allowed to. You might wonder, why does he not launch himself out there as a loose cannon? Quite simply, his narcissism is ensuring this is kept in check. It is quite unusual for a narcissist of his school, but the reason that it's happening is one huge residual benefit, and the issue of control. He is essentially potless. He has had to sell the villa, the skiing villa that he had, and he has significant legal liabilities, not only in terms of the legal bills that he's going to have to pay, but the potential for a large damages claim being made successfully against him. He has, of course, his own ongoing costs, and of course, as a consequence of the scandal that is associated with these allegations, people have been and will continue to distance themselves from him, and therefore the lucrative deals that he once sought to do, shady as they were, see A Very Royal Narcissist Part 5, will dry up, and therefore he becomes all the more reliant upon Her Majesty the Queen for financial support. A loss of financial support would be a threat to control, and therefore, as you know, his narcissism needs to assert control over all appliances at all times. And therefore, in order to avoid the threat to control posed by financial impunity and the fact that he is reliant upon the residual benefit of financial support from his mother, his narcissism is not going to cause him to attack the Queen, nor to go on a rampage which would cause problems for her. And instead, he remains that caged beast, kept away, kept largely out of the public eye, now stripped of his titles, ready to continue to fight the case. He will look to stymie the case any way that he can, to prevent it from proceeding. Whether he succeeds yet remains to be seen. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.